Hello, my name is storyteller Beth Horner, and I am here to tell you that ghost storytelling has long been a tradition here at the National Storytelling Festival. From the early days when we would gather around a roaring fire next to one of Jonesboro's historic graveyards, up to today in Mill Spring Park, where the ghost storytellers are lighted up in a gazebo in eerie fashion with everyone snuggled around on blankets and lawn chairs spread out through the park. We have 4 ghost storytellers for you: Kim Whitecamp, Jeff Doyle, Lynn Ford, and Simon Brooks. Beginning now.
He knew from the minute he saw her that he had to have her. She walked by his table at the little pub, her long hair swinging with the rhythm of her hips. And when she turned and looked at him with eyes as green as sea glass washed ashore, he knew that she was going to be his wife. And boy, he courted her. And 3 months later, they were married and they moved to a little chocolate box-sized house on the edge of town. Now, she had no family to speak of, and she really had no goods except her clothing and a spinning wheel. And as they were moving her things into the house on the wedding day, she said to him, listen, she said, I really want to keep the spinning wheel on my side of the bed. And he said, well, there's an extra bedroom, and we're not going to have a baby for a while. Just put the extra spinning wheel in there. And she said, well, I don't really have anything else but my clothing. She said, please, can I just keep it on my side of the bed? Well, he looked at her with her pale skin, her beautiful eyes, her long, dark ebony hair, and he could deny her nothing. And he said, yes, put it on your side of the bed. That's fine. Well, on the evening of their wedding, they had a lovely meal that was brought to them by neighbors around the area. There was fresh bread and basket, homemade butter, thick, delicious, meaty stew, and they ate and talked, and the conversation was lively and fun, and he kept looking at his wife and thinking, she is so lovely. And he was excited to go to bed. That night, he helped her clean up, and he went up to the bedroom before her, and he disrobed and had his undergarments on, and he got into bed and laid there, and as she walked in, he peeled back the covers and patted the bed and said, come to bed. Let me hold you. You're my wife now. She sat on the edge of the bed and turned towards him and said, well, I was going to ask you something. Just for tonight. Would it be okay if I stayed up? Just for tonight. This is all so new to me. My own home with a husband. I've never had this before. I've never even had family. She said, it's just all so new. Just can I stay up tonight? The man said, okay. All right. He said, that's fine. I understand. We have the rest of our lives together. And she smiled at him. She patted around the bed and leaned over and kissed him on the head. And she said, thank you. She said, I'll tell you what. Since you are just going to go to sleep and I'm going to get to stay up for a little bit, I'll sing to you. And that'll help you go to sleep. And he said, okay. He closed his eyes and he could smell the lavender on her hair. And then she lifted her voice. Eyes closed. Night falls, stars blink a warning, moon glows on silent night, no one knows my wanting. The man was fast asleep. The next morning he woke up, on his side, curled up in a nice tight ball, comfortable. He had slept so deep. Well rested, he stretched. The sun was coming through the window, and he remembered, my wife. I have a wife. And he turned to look at her and to greet her into the day, and what he saw took his breath away. She was curled up into a ball, her hands and fists throbbing veins on the back, her eyes red rimmed with pus coming out the side, dripping down her cheek that was blotched red. Her hair was sticking to her face and to her neck. And she was looking at him, and those green eyes were glowing with what looked like hate. And he looked at her and he said, what's wrong? And she said, nothing. Nothing is wrong. And he said, something has to be wrong. Just tell me, do you need water? Do you need food? Are you sick? She said, nothing is wrong. Go to work. The man slid off of the bed, took his clothing off the hook and slid them on. And as he did, he looked at her, watched her. And before he stepped out the door to head to work, he said, are you sure there's nothing that go to work. I'm fine. So he went to work. At the end of the day, as he headed home, out through the one side of town, down the dirt road to the house, he could hear his heart pounding in his chest. He was nervous. And as the house came into view, he saw his wife standing in the door. She filled out the frame. Her long, dark hair hung. And as he got closer, her arms came up and opened wide. He jogged to her, fell into her arms. She wrapped them around her. She smelled like fresh soap. He kissed her on that sweet place that she loved so much, and he said, I am so happy you're okay. He leaned back and touched her shoulders, and he said, my beautiful, beautiful wife, I'm so glad you're okay. She said, of course I'm okay. Come in. I made fresh bread. And he went in, washed up, sat down, and they had a wonderful dinner. Lively conversation, caught up on the day. He helped her clean up, and then he practically skipped to the bedroom. He got ready and tucked himself into bed, and he waited, and as she came in, he peeled down the covers, and he said, my wife, come to bed. I want to hold you. Well, I know I said it would only be just one night, but I'm still not comfortable. It's not you. You're thoroughly enjoyable. I've loved the day that we've had here as husband and wife, and now we're moving into the next. I've loved it, but it's still so new to me, and I just need another night. The man looked at her, that beautiful porcelain skin, dark hair, and he could deny her nothing, and he said, okay. And she patted around the bed, and she kissed him on the forehead and said, I'll sing to you again. He said, okay, that's fine. And she did. Eyes close, night falls, stars blink a warning, moon glows on silent night, no one knows my wanting. The man was fast asleep. And the next morning he woke up, deeply rested once again, the sun coming through the window. And he remembered, my wife. I have a wife. And he reached out as he turned, and he felt it before he saw her, that the whole bed was soaked with sweat. And he looked at her laying there, and she was curled up in a ball, her hands clenched in fists, throbbing veins on the back, her face red, splotched, pus coming out of her red-rimmed eyes. She was breathing heavy, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, her hair stuck to her body. And he said, just tell me what is wrong. What's wrong? If you tell me, I can fix it. And she said, nothing is wrong. Go to work. And the man slid out of bed, put on his clothing, and backed out of the room. 3 nights, 4 nights. And on the 5th day, he could not concentrate on his work. And the mill foreman came over and he said, what's wrong? You're a newly married man. Are you exhausted? He said, no. He said, my wife, she's sick. Oh, your wife. She's a beautiful woman. He said, I know, but something is wrong. And I can't focus on my work. I need to go talk to somebody and find out what I can do for her. And the mill foreman said, listen, you go. You take care of your wife. Just leave early today. And so he did. And as he left, he knew deep in his heart that this was not a sickness that the village doctor could handle. And he knew he had to go somewhere he'd never been to before. But he had heard about it and knew where it was. He walked through that little village to the end of the border and then onto a dirt road, took that sharp right, followed it until he saw the stack of rocks on the side of the road that marked the spot that he'd seen before and had heard about before, but never used as a directional. He made a sharp turn. Into the woods he went, following an exact straight line from those rocks. He walked, and as he did, he thought to himself, what is wrong with my wife? She can't be pregnant. She's too young for menopause. If it was that, I could understand. This is something that I think goes much deeper. And as he had that thought, he saw it. The little house of the conjure woman that he had heard about from tales from his great-grandmother and his grandmother and his mother. It was there. Straight shot arrow from those rocks. He walked up and he knocked on the door. And the door opened and there she was. Hello. Can I help you? You look like you have a story on your shoulders. The weight of it, come in and I'll help you. The man, with a little hesitation, stepped across the threshold into that little house. Wood and fire, must and herbs. She said, sit down, I'll give you a cup to drink, and you can tell me your story. And so he sat down. She placed the cup and saucer on the table filled with a warm liquid. She pushed it in front of him, and he could smell the spices of cinnamon, and he took a sip and instantly calmed. Tell me your story, I can't wait to hear, she said. And he said, it's my wife. He said, I married my wife just 4 or 5 days ago. We've had 4 nights together, and every night, instead of coming to bed with me so I can hold her, she instead sings to me, and I sleep better than I've ever slept. But when I wake up, she is not the woman that I married. She's sweating and pussy and red-eyed and angry and pulsing, and I don't know what to do. And the conjure woman looked at him and said, oh, you've done married a boo hag. What? Said the man. You've done married a boo hag, and that beautiful skin she's in is not her skin. It's borrowed. That is not her beauty. And he said, you are crazy. I should have never came here. He pushed the table. It bumped the boo hag in the chest. She stood up. He stood up. He turned to go to the door. She reached out and grabbed him with a strength that shocked him and held him back and said, wait a minute. I promise you, I'm correct. And tonight when you go to bed, put something in your ears so you don't hear the song, and then watch. And tell me what you see. The man jerked his arm away, and he went and ran through the woods, tripping over roots and rocks. He stumbled out onto the road, and in the light of the moon, he took deep, gulping breaths and thought, my wife. A boo hag? That's impossible. It is impossible. My wife is lovely. She's beautiful. She's my wife. It's impossible. Not her skin. And he began to walk home. And as he went through that little village to the other side and took the dirt road to his house, he longed to see her in the doorway. And as it came into view, there she was. Frame filling out the doorway. Her long dark hair, freshly washed, her arms raised to take him in, and he fell into her arms. And he kissed her at that sweet spot that she loved so much. And he noticed that her ear seemed lower than before. He shook it off. That conjure woman's gotten into my head. And he looked at his wife and said, I'm so happy to be home. I am so sorry I'm late. She said, it's not a problem. Come in. I have a good meal plan, a fresh roasted chicken. They sat down and they ate and they talked and they laughed. There was a fresh leek soup off to the side. He pushed it in front of him. The steam warmed his face. He brought the spoon to his mouth. It was delicious. She was talking about a woman she had met in the village that day as she shopped, and he looked up to smile at her. And that was when he noticed that the wrinkles that should rest upon the knuckles of her hand had somehow slipped an inch. He ate his soup. It's not possible, he thought. That woman has to be wrong. He ate his soup and smiled at his wife and listened to her as she talked. watching her mouth and her face, thinking, it can't be. That beautiful skin. He helped her clean up and he went into the bedroom. And as he got dressed before she entered, he ripped off the bottom piece of linen on his nightshirt, curled it up and put it in both of his ears. And he laid down and waited. She walked in, and when she did, he said to her, only hearing a muffled voice, "Tonight, sing to me, I don't feel well." Concern creased her brow, and she said, "Absolutely, husband." She came around the side of the bed. Her weight pushed it down as she put her arm across him and leaned in and kissed him. Eyes closed, night, star. And he saw her mouth stop moving, and he let his eyelids shut. And he feigned sleep. He felt her weight lift off of the bed as she made her way back around to the other side. And he popped the linen shirt piece out of his ear, and he listened. He listened to the heavy creak of the spinning wheel as she sat on it. He could hear the light dropping of her clothing garments hit the floor. And then he heard a sound he'd never heard before in his life. The man opened his eyes just enough to see what was happening. And there she was, his wife, sitting on the spinning wheel, her hand outstretched, and thick threads of skin coming down off of her hand, off of her arm, her chest and her body, until there was nothing left but pulsating red muscle. She got up off of the spinning wheel and walked over to the window, lifted the sash, grabbed the sides, hopped up onto the windowsill with one jump, lurched out of the window, and flew into the night. The man held the sheets up around his neck and looked out the window. She was gone. But he knew she'd be back. He jumped out of bed, threw on his clothing, went out of the house, through the village, made that turn, saw the rocks, went straight as an arrow right into the house, knocked on the door. The door flew open and she said, "I told you so." She's a boo hag. He pushed by her and he said, "You are not going to believe what I saw." And she said, "Oh, I want to know. Tell me. I've never seen it myself." And he told her what he saw. And he said, "I don't want her to come back. You have to tell me what to do." And she said, "Okay, calm down. I'll tell you what you have to do. Do you have tools and paint?" The man said, "Of course I do. I am a man. They are in my shed." She said, "Good. You go to your shed and you get your tools and your paint. Paint every single doorway a blue paint except for one. Nail all of them shut, but that one window, keep it open enough she can push herself through, but she has to work for it, and then drag up the wood with your woodworking tools." Sharp edges on the window. And then pour salt in the skin that lays beside your bed, and then wait. And make sure you're done before the sun comes up. The man didn't even wait to hear any more. He ran out of her house, down the road, went to his little house, around the back to the shed. There was a can of blue paint, Periwinkle Sherwin-Williams blue, I believe. He grabbed his tools. He painted every single door jamb, every single window, but the one in the bedroom. He nailed them all shut with thick, heavy handmade nails from the blacksmith. But the bedroom window, he opened it just enough that she'd have to squeeze and push herself through. And then he took his carving tools and pushed up ragged, dagger-sharp pieces of wood. He went into the house, dropped the things in the hallway, went to the kitchen, got a box of salt and a wooden spoon. He went into the bedroom, went around the side of the bed, and there it was. Ooh. Her skin. a glistening pink pile of flesh thread. He poured the box of salt on it, dropped it onto the floor, kicked it under the bed, took the wooden spoon, stuck it into the flesh, and began to stir. Dropped the spoon on the floor, kicked it under the bed, got in the bed, pulled up the covers, and looked open that slit of a window and waited. Aye! He heard her coming. The sky was slowly turning from a deep midnight blue to a lighter indigo, and he knew morning was coming as she flew through the sky. Aye! He saw her silhouette coming. And as she came to the house, she tried to fit into the window and couldn't. She went around the other parts of the house to find other windows and doors that were open. Whoomp, he heard her hit the side of the house. Aye! With anger, she screamed. Whoomp, on the side of a window. It sounded like raw meat on a butcher's block. He was breathing heavy and petrified as he heard her come back full circle to the other side of the house where the window in the bedroom was. And she looked through it and looked at him with eyes filled with hate. And he knew if she made it in, she would kill him. She began to push her muscled body through the window, and those sharp, daggered pieces of wood cut away at her body. Wide open wounds began to appear as she finally pushed her body through that slitted window. She landed with a thud like furniture in an upstairs room on a soft carpet. And she looked at him, and as she did, she began to pull her skin back on. "When I get a hold of you," she said. And as she began to pull the skin up, the salt got into the fresh wounds. "Ow!" she said as she began to try and pull it up. She couldn't do it. The pain was more than she could bear. And the apricot pink color of the sun kissed the top of the mountains. And before she got it halfway up her body, the morning sun shot through the window onto the boo-hag. And when it hit her, whoosh, she was gone. And thin gray paper, confetti, skin, feathered to the floor. The man moved to the edge of the bed. She was gone. He got out of bed and went to the kitchen and got the broom and the dustpan. He went around the side of the bed and he swept up what's left of his wife. He then went to the window and blew it out of that deathly hole and sent her back to where she came from. He didn't go to work for 2 days, not feeling well, he said. And then soon people started asking questions. "Where's your wife?" "Oh, she had to go take care of relatives." They said. "You know, she was too beautiful for her. We knew this was going to happen. She left him, much too pretty for him." And he was fine with that. Let them believe what they want. He sold that house. He didn't even want to be in it, and bought a little farm on the edge of town on the other side of the village. "I'll never get married again. She's not coming back," he would tell people. What a pity. But never say never. Because a year later, a baker moved into town and he had a helper. She was a simple girl. Thick tree trunk legs with socks to the knees that wouldn't even dare think of falling. Built like a board, tight bun pulling back on her head, making her cheeks lift. And she would knead that dough as if her life depended on it. And when he would go get his fresh bun every morning before work, and he would look at her and think, "Now there's a woman. Beauty isn't everything. That's good stock right there. She's going to be a hard worker, good wife, good partner." And he asked her out. "I never thought I'd get married again," he said after about a month. "But I'm fond of you. And if you'll have me, I'd love to marry you. You can move to my farm." "Oh, I would love that," she said. "I think that's a good idea, solid idea." And people asked her, "Is there anything wrong with him? You know, his first wife left him." She goes, No, nothing at all. Fine man. Pokes at my cheeks a little, pinches my hand. Odd. But other than that, he's a good man. Treats me well." And so they were married. And guess what? She got pregnant, and not even a year later, gave birth to a sweet little baby. Beautiful, everybody in town talked about how absolutely stunning that baby was. And the baby stayed in the room with them for a while. And then, just a few weeks later, they said, you know, it's all, you can put it in the other bedroom. We've got the room ready. We'll put the baby in there. And the first night the baby was in that room, not by the side of the bed where she slept, began to cry. And he said, I'll get the baby. She said, no. You have to work tomorrow. I'll take care of the baby. And she could feel the weight of her leave the bed as she padded out the door and into the other bedroom. I'm a lucky man, he thought. And he listened as she picked up the baby, and the baby stopped crying. He could hear her speaking sweet words to the baby. And then she began to sing to it. Eyes closed. Shh. Night falls. Stars blink a warning. Moon glows on silent night. No one knows my wanting.
Beware of the night crawlers was scrawled across the barn in red spray paint. The farmer was upset, not only because he was going to have to repaint the side of the barn, but because he knew what it meant. Jake thought it was odd that kids would come this far out in the country to spray paint or tag a barn. But the more he thought about it, he had seen "Beware of the night crawlers" written all over the town of Wildwood. It was in the bathroom stall at the Sunoco station. It was written on the bridge overpass. And it was even on the marquee sign of the Methodist Church. Beware of the night crawlers. He had no idea what it meant. Jake had been working on the farm for the Wendigo Wind Turbine Company. Wendigo had contracts with local power companies all up and down the coast of Lake Michigan to install wind turbines. It was a new job for Jake. He had just graduated with a degree in electrical engineering, and it was his dream job. He always wanted to work in renewable energy. The only drawback with Wendigo was that the owner of Wendigo thought that all of his new engineers should spend a couple of years in the field before coming into the office learning how to build those turbines. And Jake was kind of one of those really smart, nerdy guys, and, well, he didn't really get along or didn't fit in with those roughneck guys that usually put up the turbines. That is, except for Adam. Adam was about Jake's age, and he was an electrical apprentice, and, well, they hung out in all their free time together, mostly working out at the local gym or playing video games. And finally, one day, Jake said, "What is the deal with Beware of the Night Crawlers?" And Adam told him. He said, "Well, it's an old local legend, a legend that the night crawlers come up from the ground. They invade your body. They take over your mind. And they are almost impossible to kill because they say that if you cut a night crawler in half, it doesn't die. It just grows into 2 night crawlers." "No," said Jake. "Yeah, I know," said Adam, "but I think it was created in the 1970s by the Chamber of Commerce in Wildwood to promote the Halloween celebration. And, you know, high school kids have just taken off with it ever since. I even painted it in a few places when I was in high school in Wildwood." Wildwood was your typical Midwestern small town. It had, you know, some 2-story buildings, a short main street. There was a hardware store and a pharmacy, a couple of resale shops. And then on the corner was the Bobcat Bar and Grill. And everybody hung out at the Bobcat. Why? Well, because it was the only place in Wildwood to hang out. It was kind of an eclectic place. It had a big stone fireplace in it with a big elk hanging over the top of it, and it had a small old wooden dance floor, a very homey bar, and then there were 2 pool tables there. And it was at that one of those pool tables that Jake got hustled out of a couple of days' wages, which was fairly unusual for Jake because, well, he was a pretty good pool player. He had earned his spending money in college playing pool. But he met Tara at one of those pool tables. Tara was a dirty blonde hair, and she had these brown eyes and a smile that just drew him right in. And she wore tight Levi's and a tight T-shirt. And when she was shooting pool, he just lost all of his composure. She must have felt sorry for him after taking his money because she went over to the bar and bought him a beer. She asked him what he did. He told her all about Wendigo, and he said the only drawback was that the bad thing was that those wind turbines take out a fair number of birds. And she said, well, we don't need that many birds in the world. He thought that comment was odd, but he let it go. And then he asked her what she did. And she said, well, I work at the Wildwood Cannabis Farm. You could say that we grow wildwood weed. A joke that was totally lost on Jake, but I hope that a few of you guys get it. Well, he was very interested then. He said, well, do you grow it in hoop houses? Is it organic? I would love to see the operation someday. And Tara said, well, I came with my friend over there, and, well, she drove. If you want to drive me back to the farm, I live out at a cottage at the farm. If you want to take me home, I'll show you the whole operation. Well, this had never happened to Jake before, so he ran out to his truck. He threw all of the fast food wrappers that were on the floorboards and seat over the back of the front seat, and then Tara got in. It was an old truck with a bench seat, and she slid over right next to him. They drove out to the farm, and she showed him the whole operation, the hoop houses, everything, the grow operation. And when they were done, it had started to rain a little bit, and they ended up on the front porch of that cottage that she lived in, and it was a fairly large front porch. There was an awkward silence in the conversation, and he thought, well, maybe I should try to turn and kiss her. And as he turned to do that, well, Tara, she kicked off her cowboy boots, and then she ran out into the wet grass and slid down. He thought, that's odd, but, well, I guess what am I going to do? So he undid his work boots, took off his socks, and he ran out in the wet grass, and he slid down next to her. He could see in the moonlight, in the barn light, in that grassy yard, he could see her tree of life tattoo on her ankle. He asked her about it. Tara said, well, I really love the way the roots go into the soil there, and they give life to that tree. And then she said, you want to see something really cool? Well, yeah. She took out her phone and she turned on the flashlight and she shined it across the grass. And it looked like it was waving back and forth. And Jake said, what's that? Well, that's the night crawlers. They come out when there's a lot of dew on the grass, or when we have a fresh rain like this. They come up from the ground to drink, to breathe, to dance, to mate. And then she reached over and she grabbed one off the ground. It wrapped around her finger and she put it right in front of Jake's face. He didn't really care for worms per se. And she said, these are the guys that do the real work at the farm. They till all the soil for us. And then she said, you know, Jake, if you're real still, you can feel them come up from the ground and they will tickle your toes. They will come up and say hello in your hands. And Jake could feel them on his hands and toes. And He didn't like it, but he was trying to be brave, and he says, oh, thank gosh. I thought that the night crawlers, with all these signs around town, I thought it was some evil creature that came up from the ground and ate you. And she says, oh, don't believe those old rumors. Those aren't true. And then she leaned in to kiss Jake. But right then, his phone rang. He wasn't familiar enough with dating or these kind of situations to know that he should have turned his phone down. And then he violated that rule that you should never violate. He answered his phone. It was work. There was an emergency. And, well, he had to go. He said he was really sorry. Tara was upset, and he ran over to the porch, put his socks and boots back on, and as he was backing his truck down the driveway, he thought, I am never going to hear from Tara again. I am just an idiot. But the next day, he was standing 200 foot in the air on top of one of those wind turbines, and his phone rang. And it was Tara, and she said, hi, Jake, we didn't get to finish our date last night. How about you pick me up at the farm after work, and we'll go out to 9 Mile Point, and we'll have a picnic? He said, that's great. I'll see you then. So the first thing he did was he stopped and got a blanket at his house because he was never, ever going to sit on the bare, wet grass again. And he picked Tara up. They went out to 9 Mile Point. It's a bluff that overlooks Lake Michigan. She fixed a beautiful picnic for him, chicken salad and with grapes in it and such. And they were having a really nice time. She asked if he wanted dessert. Well, yeah, that would be great. I would love dessert. It's a surprise. You got to close your eyes and open your mouth. So he closed his eyes, and she said, tip your head back. And he tipped his head back, and then he could hear what could only be described. Fishermen would recognize this noise. It was like a cheap plastic, like she was opening a bait container. And she shook out a worm and she dangled it over his mouth, and then he opened his eyes. He didn't trust her. And he said, no, I'm not going to eat one of those. There's no way. I'm not going to eat that. Oh, come on, Jake. You're in Wildwood now. You can't really be a Wildwood resident without at least eating one nightcrawler. No, I'm not going to eat that. But she had such beautiful brown eyes, and no, I'm not going to do it. No, yeah, no. And she pleaded with him, and then he made a mistake. He said, I'll eat one if you eat one. Well, Tara picked that one up, plopped it in her mouth, swallowed it whole. She said the key is don't bite it. You want to swallow it whole. And so she picked one out of that bait container and shook it off and then wiped some of the dirt off. And he opened his mouth and she dropped it in, and it was squirming around in his mouth. And he was just about to spit it out when she slapped him on the back and he swallowed it whole. And then she kissed him like he had never been kissed before in his life. Meanwhile, while all of this was going on, a storm rolled in off of Lake Michigan. And unbeknownst to them, they saw a flash of lightning and then a crack of thunder. Well, like I say, Jake was kind of a nerdy guy, and he was the safety officer at Wendigo, and he said, we got to get out of here. We got to leave. Maybe we could go back to the cottage. And so they did. They got in his truck, and they were driving down Highway 31. It was a wet night. The rain was pounding down, and a deer ran out in front of the truck. Jake swerved, and the truck hit the ditch. It rolled over 3 times. Tara was thrown from the truck. The truck ended up upside down in the ditch. Jake was hanging from his seat belt. The headlights were shining right over the road. He could see Tara lying on the road. Her leg had been severed just above the knee. He could see the tree of life tattoo shining in the headlight. He woke up 3 weeks later. He was in a hospital in downstate Michigan. His parents had moved him closer to them so they could help him recover. Jake asked his parents what happened to Tara. They had no idea. He tried to call Adam, but he couldn't get an answer. It took him 3 months to recover before he went back to the job at Wendigo. But his first day back at the office, the phone rang and it was Tara. "Hi, Jake." "Oh my gosh, are you okay? I thought you were dead." She said, "Come out to the farm tonight and I'll explain everything." So Jake, after work, drove out to the farm and he pulled in the driveway and he was getting out of his new car and headed toward the porch when Tara came bounding across the porch, jumped off the porch and ran down the driveway and gave him a hug. "Oh my goodness, I thought you were dead. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I thought you lost your leg." She goes, "No, I never lost my leg." She was wearing a short dress, and he looked down and looked her over, and he said, "What happened to your Tree of Life tattoo on your ankle?" And she said, "I never had a Tree of Life tattoo. You must have bumped your head." And he thought, well, I have been having some bad headaches. And she said, "Come into the house." And they did. And she sat him down at the kitchen table. He sat on one side. She sat on the other. And as they were talking, another woman came out of the kitchen. Tara said, "I'd like to introduce you to my twin sister, Eartha. She's visiting from out of town." Jake looked back and forth. Identical. Even the same haircut. They were wearing the same dress. He was a little confused, and then he looked down, up and down Eartha, and he noticed that on her ankle there was a Tree of Life tattoo. He was confused. "How are you feeling, Jake, since the accident?" "Oh, I've got this terrible headache I have all the time. I bumped my head." And he says, "My stomach is constantly turning. I don't know what it is. They haven't been able to figure it out." And Tara said, "Well, Jake, I think we can help you with that." And Eartha got him some tea. She said, "Drink this tea. It'll help settle your stomach." And then Tara said, "Jake, do you remember eating that night crawler the night of the accident?" "Yeah." "Well, that night crawler has grown inside you, and it's been 3 months. It's time. We need to get that thing out of there. It's overtime. Jake, that thing is probably 6 feet long." "Oh, would you like us to help you get it out of there?" "Yeah." "Well, we'll have Eartha's going to coach you. Drink that tea down. It'll help you relax." So Eartha stepped up next to him and says, "I want you to look right into Tara's eyes." And he did. And those brown eyes seemed to get bigger and bigger. And it was like he was being hypnotized by her eyes. He was staring right into them. And then he started to notice, as he was staring in her eyes, her throat started to move up and down and swell a little bit. And then her mouth started to open. And then out of her mouth came this night crawler. And it was 1 inch in diameter. "It's okay, Jake. Relax," said Eartha. And the night crawler came out over the table. And that's when Jake felt it. The stirring in his stomach. "Relax, Jake, relax." And Jake relaxed, and then out of his mouth came a night crawler the same size as Tara's, and they met over that table. Jake didn't quite know what to think. Eartha said, Jake, can you hear me? Jake, when those night crawlers break, you're going to have a split second. You're going to reach up and you are going to grab that night crawler, okay? You're going to have a split second. When I say go, you do it. And then all of a sudden she said, go! And he reached up and he got a hold of that night crawler. And he started to pull it out, and that night crawler, with every fiber of its being, was trying to go back down Jake's throat. He could feel the segmentation in his throat. He could feel the little hairs on the side of it. He pulled it out a foot, and then Eartha grabbed on with him, and they started to pull it out. And he pulled it out a little farther, and a little 2 feet out, and then 3 feet out. And when she had it 3 feet out, Eartha wrapped it around her arm, and she reached over behind her on the counter, and she grabbed a butcher knife and she cut it off. The part that was still in Jake slid back down his throat. The other part wrapped around Eartha's arm, and she came up and she looked Jake straight in the eye. And she said, thank you, Jake. And then she turned and went into her room in the cottage. Nine months later, Jake was standing in the living room in the cottage. The midwife was running from Tara's room to Eartha's room, from Tara's room to Eartha's room, and she was looking very confused. Standing next to Jake was his clone, his exact twin. They watched as that midwife went back and forth. And then they looked at each other, wondering what they were gonna have. Beware of the night crawlers.
You may have heard from old folklore that it's not a good idea to whistle in the graveyard. But I bet nobody ever told you why. You see, when you whistle in the graveyard, those who are under the ground can hear and feel that breath, and they may rise because they want to breathe again, and they may follow you wherever you go. There was a girl by the name of Nell, prettiest child in that little community, a mining town where all the men worked in the mine and all the women did their best to support their men. And that's what Nell was learning to do, learning from her mama and her grandmama, how to cook, how to clean, how to sew, how to keep a garden and preserve what came from it. And she worked hard and liked to sing all the while that she was working. There wasn't much else for her to do. There wasn't a school in that community, and the only book that she had ever learned to read was the Bible, when her mama taught her how to read it. Every day, Nell would go down to the mine and meet her daddy when he'd finished his work and walk him back home and talk about his day and her day and how beautiful the day might be, even though the coal dust had settled into everything. Then something happened. A young man by the name of Paul, nicknamed Paulie, moved in with his auntie there. You see, his uncle had died in an accident in the mines, and he came to support his auntie, or perhaps to get away from some troubles of some sort. He was the finest looking young man that the girls had ever seen, and all of them had marriage on their minds. What else was there to do? And he had a nice, deep voice, and he was taller than any of the other young men. And he carried books with him when he moved in with his auntie. And not only could he read the Bible, but he could recite poetry from his heart and his head. Oh, all the girls were just aflutter when they met Polly. And after a while, Nell wasn't meeting her daddy when he came out of the mines. She would tell him, "Daddy, Mama's got supper almost ready. You go on home. I'll be there soon." And then she'd stand around and wait until Polly came out the mine and talk with him just a little. And he had his eye on her just as much as she had her eye on him. And after a while, they were walking together, arm in arm, even though there was coal dust on his arm, down to his auntie's house. And she would wait outside while he cleaned himself all up and got himself all spiffy and came out with a wet rag to wipe the coal dust off her hand. And then he'd take her arm again and walk her down the road toward her house, but they'd kind of veer up the hillock and over the rails and into the woods to an abandoned shed. And Nell never questioned the fact that the shed floor had been cleaned, and there was an old blanket sitting there, waiting for them, ready for the sweet words that would come from Polly's mouth, whispered into Nell's ear. Oh, her heart went ka-thunk, ka-thunk, ka-thunk. And she was coming home later and later from her so-called walk in the woods. Her mama got a little bit worried about that, but she was always smiling. Her daddy got concerned about Polly and Nell, but she said everything was just fine and that she thought they were doing some courting and they were going to get married. So Nell started working on a white dress, and she got the pattern and saved every penny she could to get some fine cloth. She started tatting the lace herself to put around the collar and the sleeves, and Mama was happier when she saw that, but she still called Granny to have a little talk with Nell. Daddy said she shouldn't see Polly as much, but Nell wanted to be with Paul, and so she said to him one day, "I can sneak away from the house. I sing all the time while I'm working, and I'll sing a song, and you'll know that I'm calling to you, and when I hear you whistle, I'll come into the woods and meet you at that shed." And that's what they started doing. Instead of Nell sitting in the house and doing her stitching or working in her garden or just sitting in the yard a bit, Nell would sing. And after she'd sung, she'd listen. She'd sing, "Oh, whistle and I will come to you, my lad. Oh, whistle and I will come to you, my lad. Though my father and mother and all may be mad, oh, whistle and I will come to you, my lad." And she'd listen for that soft, slow whistle. And that's when Nell would make her way out the back gate and up over the hillock and across the rails into the woods to that abandoned shed, and Polly would be waiting for her. Well, this went on and on and on. And Nell knew for certain they were going to get married. She'd finished that white dress, except for a little bit of extra lace around the sleeve. And one day she sang the song, and there was no whistle. And she sang the song again, and there was no whistle. And she sang the song again as she braided her hair, her long dark braids hanging over her nightgown, ready to go out the back door if Polly should whistle. And there was no sound. The next day, she walked down to the mines, told her daddy supper was almost ready, waited for Polly. He wouldn't even make eye contact with her. And she looked to see where his eyes were moving, and there was Em. Emma was the second prettiest girl in that little town. long yellow braids and big blue eyes and a kind of a snorty, silly giggle. But the fellas looked at her, too, just as much as she looked at them, with an eye on getting married, because what else was a girl going to do? And Polly held out his arm to her, and she took his cold, dust-covered hand, and they walked away. Polly never looked at Nell. And Nell followed, watched, a pace back, and they went to Polly's auntie's house, and that girl waited outside. And Nell watched as Polly came out all spiffed up with a cold, wet rag to wipe the coal dust off of Em's hand, and then walk her down the road close to Nell's house, but up that hillock and over those rails and into the woods. And she thought she had heard Em sing a song, and she'd never thought about it. Oh, whistle, and I will come to you, my lad. And she remembered she had heard a soft, low whistle. But she hadn't sung the song, and she realized who Polly was whistling for. She didn't follow him into the woods. She went home, her heart shattered. And she stopped eating. She stopped talking. She stopped singing. She stopped working. She took to her bed, but she didn't sleep. And her mama tried to make her feel better, and when Nell wouldn't get out the bed, her mama brought that white dress and showed her that Mama was making the lace, tatting it just to cover that sleeve that wasn't quite finished, maybe put a little around the hem. Daddy tried to talk to that girl, and she just turned on one side and didn't listen. Even Granny came and talked to her about the ways of men and women and how there'd be another young man, but Nell didn't listen. And after a while, there was no more talking except for the preacher coming to do a little praying. The girl had died. And her family dressed her in that white dress she'd been working on so hard and brushed out her long, dark hair, gently waving over that white dress. And they wrapped her in a quilt that her mama had made for her hope chest. And they placed her in the coffin that had been made for Granny. And they buried her in the graveyard, too young, too young. And when Polly realized what had happened, well, he felt something in his heart, too. One evening, he was walking along with Em, and they were getting close to the graveyard, and Polly started talking about Nell and how much he missed her and how sweet she was and how kind, what a big heart she had, and how he loved to hear her sing. And finally, Em had had enough. They were at the graveyard, and Em said, "Well, you miss her so much, you love her so much, there she is. You go and talk to her in there. You go and whistle for her the way you whistled for me." And she kept on picking and picking at Polly until finally he stepped on into the graveyard. And he called out, "I miss you, girl." And he gave a soft, low whistle. The wind started to change. The wind started to rise. And that other girl, Em, she decided to go home, left Polly standing by himself right there just inside the graveyard. And as he looked toward the place where that poor girl was buried, he thought he saw kind of a mist rise, and it wasn't cool enough for any kind of fog from a warm day. Didn't make any sense for all the crickets to stop making sound. Even the birds weren't singing. And that thing that he saw, it seemed to be growing, rising right up out of the ground. And it seemed to be wearing a long white dress, and its long dark hair spread out over the dress, and its long dead fingers reached toward him. And Polly thought he heard a song. Oh, whistle, and I will come to you, my lad. Oh, whistle, and I will come to you, my lad. Though my father and mother and all may be mad. Oh, whistle, and I will come to you, my lad. I will always come to you. Well, Polly started walking toward his auntie's house, walking outside the graveyard. And he seemed to see something at the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look, there wasn't anything there, yet he could still hear that song. Oh, whistle, and I will come to you, my lad. I will always come to you. Polly was walking even faster, and it seemed like that shadowy thing was keeping pace with him, and he crossed the road, crossed all that dust, and thought maybe he'd seen the dust rising because it got into the graveyard too. But that thing seemed to walk right through the fencing, and it started to move toward him. Polly started to run, and that thing kept pace, and he was running as fast as he could. He was getting out of breath. He was almost at his auntie's, and that thing was closer and closer and closer to him. He could almost feel its fingers touching his cheek. When he got to his auntie's house, he tried to open the door. It was late, and aunties locked their doors at night. He couldn't get in, and he couldn't find the key in his pocket, and that thing was reaching for him. Polly crouched down next to the door, started scratching like a dog. That thing reached out and touched his cheek, and Polly tried to scream, but no sound would come from his mouth. He just sat there, curled up in a ball, as the thing touched his face, his hair, his cheek, and with a smile that showed its dead and rotting teeth said, I will always come to you. Well, his auntie wondered why he hadn't come home the next morning, and when she opened the door, there was Polly, curled in a ball like a little baby, trembling, shaking. She thought he'd caught something, and he had. He was taken to the little infirmary, and from there to a hospital in a bigger town. Turned out he had pneumonia. But when he recovered from that, he still was not well. And he was taken to another hospital, and that's where he spent his last days, curled up in a padded room, staring at something that stood in the corner, trying to scream, but nothing would come from his mouth, as something reached toward him and promised she would always come to him. That's the way Polly spent his last days. He died too young. And that's where the ghost of Nell spent the last of her time on earth. And that's the way their story ended. Never whistle in the graveyard.
Now, I wasn't always as old as I am now. When I was a young boy, me and some of the other kids, we'd go down to this local cove, and we would take an apple and one of our knives with us, and we'd pretend that cove was a desert island. And we would slice through these apples, and we got so good at it that at one point we got them so thin they were almost transparent. Of course, the apples were supposed to last forever until we were rescued from a ship, but they never lasted much longer than lunchtime, if that. The other thing about living on the south coast was that there was a harbour, and there were docks there, and these big ships with all their huge sails would come in. Oh, it was wonderful. I always wanted to be a sailor like my dad, my deceased father, that is. He was lost at sea. Well, there I was, and I'd be down on the docks and I'd watch all these goods being brought in, the barrels that would be rolled on. Oh, the cinnamon that would come off the barrels. Oh, it was beautiful. And we'd see these lovely silks that would come off. It was a wonderful time. And I told my mum I wanted to be a sailor, but she said no. But when I was 12, I signed on one of the ships. Of course, I didn't know that it was a pirate ship. Didn't take long to find out, though. I was a cabin boy looking after the captain, right? And so there I was, polishing his boots, spitting on them and polishing, spitting and polish, until I could look at the boots and I'd see my own teeth. And if I was really good at it, I could actually see my eyes reflected in the tips of the boots. But the captain, like I said, he wasn't a nice man. He didn't like me. And he'd smack me around the ear till my ears rang for about an hour. Those boots aren't shiny enough. And then I had to learn how to do silver service. And I put all the knives and forks and the spoons in the right order. And he would yell at me for that. Those knives and forks are too close together. They're not close enough. I was always doing something wrong. Scrubbing the decks, he sometimes pushed me over or kicked the bucket, so I was covered in water. Well, one day, we're out at sea for a long time, and he tells me we've got a guest. Oh, I hadn't seen any ships for miles around. We hadn't seen ships for days. He says, make sure there is plenty to eat and plenty to drink. So I was all right. And so I go and see Cook. Cook was one of my favourite. And I go and tell him, we've got a guest. I don't know who the guest is. We're not anywhere near land. There's no ships that I've seen or heard about. And Cookie just looks at me and says, well, it is all right. It is good to know that there will be lots of food and lots to drink. I said, all right, got it. And then I went up working for the captain again. You know, I got the table set that night. Everything looked perfect. I got the 2 glasses on the table. I got the wine poured out in the goblets, put one on each side of the table, set the bottle down, and then I went to sit on my little box where I was supposed to wait with my head hanging down. I wasn't supposed to look at the captain when there were guests aboard, so he told me. But then he asked me a question. He'd never done that before. He'd never said anything other than do this or do that. That's not good enough. But he turned round and he says, do you like the crew? Well, that caught me by surprise. He wants my opinion on the crew and what I like and dislike. I was like, yeah, the crew are all right. Cook's really not. I wasn't talking to you, boy. Oh, I'm sorry, Captain. I put my eyes. I was talking to my guest. And I'm looking, there's nobody else in the room. I'm thinking he's lost his marbles. He's gone crazy. And then all of a sudden, I see the one wine glass, the guest's wine glass, lift up off the table all by itself, like by an invisible hand. And I saw it tilting, and I thought there's going to be a big splash of wine all over the table. So I was about to jump up and get a cloth or something to mop up the mess. But the wine never poured out. It just vanished. And I watched the glass slowly empty. And then the captain, I'm looking at him now, he looked across the table at this vacant space and he said, do you like the crew? And that's when I heard this voice, this soft voice say, I like the crew, especially the cabin boy. Go softer on him. There's a ghost on board, I thought. And the captain, he looked at me because my eyes are jaw open, eyes are wide, and he says, wait outside. So I went outside and I waited, but I was like, this is crazy. I can't believe it. There's this ghost on board. I was so nervous. I mean, I was a 12-year-old. I was scared witless. So I ran down to the cook and I talked to him. I was like, cook, there's a ghost on board. And the cook says, no, there is not. There is a kobold. A what? What's a kobold? Well, you do not know what a kobold is? Oh, kobold, it is this little tiny spirit, this type of creature. You know, if you made chairs, for example, if you were a chair maker, you would have a kobold that would come into your workshop and it would keep your tools sharp. It would keep the sawdust, the wood chippings away. If you were a baker, then the baker, he would not have to clean up quite as well as he needed to because the kobold would look after everything. But the kobold of the sea is the most dangerous kobold, the most powerful kobold of all. You have to do what the kobold says, otherwise well, this is how powerful he is. If you want to go places and you do what the kobold says, the kobold will have the wind be warm and beautiful and it'll get you where you want to go. No storms, nothing. But if you disagree, if you go against what the kobold says, he can create a storm that will tear your ship to shreds, smash it like it was made of matchsticks. Now go back up to the captain before he misses you and you get into trouble. All right, a kobold. Wow, I never heard of one of those before. Well, I went back up, sat outside the cabin and waited. Every once in a while I'd have to serve something, dessert or whatever, take the dirty plates away. I was quite happy not going back in that room with that kobold, whatever that thing was. And over the next few days, the captain started treating me a lot better. He forgot one time and he smacked me around the ear and pushed me over when I was scrubbing the decks. And not moments after, some of the rigging broke free and this big old wooden pulley came swinging down. And if it wasn't for the second mate who caught it before it smacked the captain, he would have been out cold-cocked. And then he treated me a lot nicer after that. Never once did my ears ring after that. Well, about a week later, we're out at sea. Obviously, we're on a pirate ship. And then old Smithy up top, old Smithy, he calls out, "Ship ahoy, ship ahoy, ship ahoy." And we looked and the captain, he pulls out his glass and he spies the ship. And he's looking at the ship. He said, "Boys, it's a merchant ship. Load the guns with powder and ball." The crew came to life. Whetstones came out, knives and swords were sharpened, braces of pistols were put together, and our ship was swung around. But then I was standing next to the captain, and I hears this voice, and this voice is just that soft, cold voice that says, "It is not a merchant ship. It is a ghost ship. Turn around." I'm looking at the captain, waiting for him to give orders, and all he says was, "Steady as we go, men, steady as we go." What? It's a kobold that's speaking. There's nobody else around. What's going on? Why isn't he turning the ship back on course? And then here's that voice again. "Turn the ship around. It is not a merchant ship. It is a ghost ship. Run." Steady as we go, men, steady as we go. I couldn't believe it. He's not listening to the kobold. And the two ships were getting closer and closer. And then I felt this cold touch on my shoulder. It sent shivers through my body. And then this voice in my ear, it whispered, "Flee the ship, young man. Flee the ship." Well, I didn't need to be told twice, but the first thing I did, I ran down to Cook, and Cook, I told him, the voice, the kobold, it spoke to me, it said, "Leave the ship." And the cook was like, "Well, can I come too?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So we grabbed some food and we grabbed some water in canteens and we made our way to the little dinghy and we lowered ourselves down and we just cut the line and drifted away. And we watched those two ships swing around each other. And I heard the captain cry, "Fire!" Two cannons shot off at this merchant ship or this ghost ship, whatever it was. And we could watch those balls as they went from one ship to the other. And it went straight through the mast and did no damage. The other one went straight through the side of the ship and did no damage. It was indeed a ghost ship. And then I heard the captain cry again, "Fire!" But there was more desperation in his voice this time. Again, the cannons fired, and one flew straight through the sails and did no harm to it whatsoever. The other one went straight through the hull, no damage. And then this mist came up and covered everything. Just as the ships were swinging around to face each other again, they vanished behind this fog. And we heard a sound that no man at sea wants to hear. The sound of wood crashing against wood. The two ships must have collided. There were screams from the crew. There were screams from the men, and we heard the splashes of water as they abandoned the ship. And then we heard the captain cry, "Ah! It is a kobold!" And then there was silence. Nothing. And the mist, it blew away. Now, you'd think that there would be bits of wood, parts of the mast, some of the cargo in its boxes floating by. We looked for some of the men. There was nothing. It was as if the giant net had been covered over everything and pulled down beneath the surface of the water. It was eerie. Well, me and Cook were in our little dinghy, and the cook looks at me and he smiles and nods. Always listen to the kobold. It's not a lesson that I ever forgot. Now, some people, when I tell them this story, they don't believe me. But I swear it's true. And if you see a cook that talks a little bit funny, like, not like me, but like the cook, and he has half a wooden leg, ask him, because he'll tell you it's true.